I try to imagine a fellow smarter than myself, and then I try to think, what would he do?
Charge up your axons, ready your receptors, and shift your lobes into upper beta phase. You are listening to Smart Drug Smarts, the podcast dedicated to helping you optimize your brain with the latest breakthroughs in neuroscience, nootropics, and psychopharmacology.
Hello and welcome to Smart Drug Smarts. I am your host, Jesse Lawler, excited to bring you the 34th edition of this podcast dedicated to the improvement of your own cognition and brain by any and all means at your disposal. This is the long-awaited Adderall episode. Adderall, probably one of the most talked about, whispered about, attention-worthy underground or off-label use-prone drugs in the world of nootropics. We're going to be talking with a doctor today who has all kinds of very interesting things to say, both some positive and negative about Adderall, and I think this will be a very interesting episode for a lot of people. If you stick around until the very end of this episode, in the Ruthless Listener Retention gimmick, I'm going to tell you how you might be causing yourself brain damage and what you can do to avoid that. And once again, we're going to be giving away 3 jars of green tea focus. This is the second of 3 weeks we will be giving away some of those for people who are signing up to the mailing list for Smart Drug Smarts. So lots going on this week. It's continuing to be a busy month of March here. And speaking of this month, let's do This Week in Neuroscience.
Smart Drug Smarts, This Week in Neuroscience.
Okay, so good news for people that are looking to forget things. If you want to be better at forgetting and get some weird memory out of your brain, maybe somebody sent you a picture on the internet you just wish you'd never seen or something like that, there's hope. And there's hope of getting it just not out of your conscious memory, but actually out of your unconscious memory. What they did in this study is they showed people a couple of objects, 2 objects, and then they asked them to intentionally forget one of them. Then they would show these objects to people, other pictures of the same object in a highly mucky visual field with lots of like overlaid patterns and visual noise and stuff like that. And we're looking at an fMRI of the person's brain to see if, even if the person wasn't consciously aware of it, if they could pick out the distorted object. And lo and behold, the object that they had intentionally spent effort trying to forget, they were indeed worse at even subconsciously recognizing, so said the fMRI data. So I found this pretty interesting because, well, for one, I'd never really thought of intentionally trying to forget something. That kind of seems like the old don't think of an elephant thing, where of course as soon as you try not to think of an elephant, you're thinking of an elephant. And I kind of assumed that trying to forget something on purpose would be equally ineffective. But as so often happens, my intuition was wrong. Now, what the study did not do is it didn't deal with emotionally impactful memories, like the kind of things you probably really would want to forget, like, something scarring from your childhood that's been haunting you. This is just trying to forget something that you saw half an hour ago in a researcher's office, which doesn't really have any emotional heft to it. So more studies are going to go on, but it's an interesting finding for sure.
Smart Drug Smarts.
And in the kind of news that I just can't help but talk about every now and then, I got a couple of 5-star reviews over the course of the past week, one of which was from an actual doctor who says, "As a physician, I love that while not dumbing the subject matter down, he keeps the information entertaining. This is a very important subject that is not given enough real attention by the medical community." And CJ in Hawaii says, "I was a total skeptic for years regarding systems and drugs to make you smarter, but science and technology has made this a reality, and your podcast was my link to finding this information. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate that. And now that I'm done with the shameless self-promotion, let me also promote the 3 bottles of green tea focus, which is a L-theanine and caffeine pill that we're going to be giving away to listeners this week. Anybody that signs up between when this episode is published and when the following episode is published on the smartdrugsmarts.com website for the Smart Drug Smarts email list will be eligible for that drawing. We sent 3 of them out this past week. We'll be sending out 3 next week, and I guess 3 the week after that. That is a total of 9, yes, count them, 9 jars for you math majors out there.
Smart Drug Smarts.
So our guest today is Dr. Jehangeer Sunderji, who is the medical director of Mind Body Medicine in Santa Monica, California. He's also an honors graduate of the USC Keck School of Medicine and Stanford University, where he specialized in integrative medicine with an emphasis on mental health and stress-related disease. Among his areas of expertise is ADHD, which is the primary on-label reason why people are prescribed Adderall, thus his expertise in Adderall and his being an excellent interview subject for us today. I got to say, I was really excited in advance for this interview, and it lived up to my expectations, and a couple surprises in there for me. But anyway, I won't spoil the surprise. Let's just dive right in.
Adderall is FDA indicated for ADHD treatment in children 6 years of age and older. It's actually not approved for ADHD treatment in adults, and it's approved for narcolepsy.
Why do they make the distinction between children and adults there?
That's a very good question. I don't know that there's a good answer to that. ADHD, or what used to be ADD, is a disease that's really known to occur in children. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of belief in the lay and scientific community that children can grow out of it. As the research has gone on, children that were identified as ADD or now ADHD get into adulthood, a good subset of which do not improve. And then they've sort of graduated into this unofficial class of adults with ADHD. In the old ICD-9 coding system, there actually is not an adult ADHD diagnosis code. So technically, it doesn't exist in adults.
That's an interesting distinction. I did not know that. It seems like ADHD is one of the most self-described things that people just sort of colloquially are like, oh yeah, I'm totally ADHD on that. But
ADHD is the disease everyone seems to want to have.
Exactly. Yeah. How actually prevalent is it, medically speaking, among the general public to your knowledge?
I'd say it's somewhere between 3 and 7%. I would also say that the research that gave me those statistics is really spotty, so who knows? I actually think ADHD is more of a functional adaptation to a media-rich environment. If you have the old status quo form of attentional structure, you can sit in a classroom and listen to a teacher. If you have this new sort of, ADHD new structure, you can look at Twitter, email, text, talk on the phone, watch TV, and throw stuff at the person next to you all at the same time. Whereas somebody with the old structure can't do that.
Right. So it's an adaptive behavior, basically.
I think there's a big component of that. I mean, any change in behavior can go too far and become maladaptive. And then you have the actual people who suffer with ADHD.
What would the suffering involved be? Basically, we're not talking actual real physical suffering, but basically just having a difficult time holding their attention.
There can be actual real physical suffering. Real physical suffering. Somebody with really true ADHD cannot pay attention. They would, trail off answering this question in mid-sentence.
Wow. Okay.
Not be able to find their keys. Legit, not I was 5 minutes late, couldn't find my keys. It's, they really can't find their keys over and over and over again. It causes a lot of distress, elevated blood pressure, elevated cortisol. Their bodies change. It's a highly, it's like being in a state of constant panic because you can't stay focused on anything. Sort of the experience would be almost like to having the memory loss that the protagonist did in that movie Memento. Mm-hmm. It's that distressing psychologically if you really have untreated ADHD.
Yeah, but that level of truly being discombobulated doesn't seem like it could possibly be 3 to 7% of the population. That's got to be sort of the far end of the spectrum, I would think.
The 3 to 7% would be the entire range of the bell curve of sufferers of that disease, and then you're really looking at, that's the description. Yeah, you're right, of about one standard deviation below the mean of symptom sufferers.
So Adderall would be something that's used for ADHD sufferers and narcoleptics, which are people that fall asleep basically at a time when they should not be falling asleep. Of the amount of Adderall that's actually out there in the world, how much of it would you say is used sort of on label for one of those two purposes versus some stuff that's basically being used for reasons other than it's intended but is somehow gotten out there?
It's really unclear to me as to the categories of use. I mean, it's honestly really rare for me to see Adderall used for an actual approved indication.
Interesting.
At least technically. Now, physicians are allowed to prescribe things off-label, and we do a lot in a lot of different specialties because it takes a while for things to be FDA approved. The drug approval process is not necessarily tailored to what is actually clinically useful. So we're used to prescribing things off-label, but Adderall is very interesting in that the indication doesn't really match the actual usage. I would say, given, your actual question to answer it straight up, off-label prescriptions for Adderall are very likely, if I had to guess, 2/3, 80%.
Wow, that's quite the statistic.
And I would say most people who take it don't even get it. They buy it from a friend, or I don't know where they're getting it from. Some of my patients have gotten it from India. It's really unclear as to where it's coming from. And I would say, a very significant percentage of actual Adderall consumption is not prescription. It's a drug.
Yeah, very interesting. As a doctor, if you make an off-label prescription of something, do you have to say what it's for or what the sort of exceptional circumstance is, or is that just sort of your own discretion?
Honestly, it depends on insurance. If you are, let's say you have HMO insurance, then absolutely positively will I have to fill out some ridiculously extensive report on what the diagnosis is and prove it. And if it's not indicated in that insurance company's formulary, then you don't get it. And they'll say, well, for the indication of adult ADHD, for instance, they may, and I've had this experience, fight back and say, well, really there is an adult ADHD, but this person did have an established record of childhood ADHD, but you haven't tried Wellbutrin and methylphenidate first. So you have to try those before you can even talk about Adderall. And then even when they do approve it, they've been approving a relatively low dose. So then their insurance becomes moot, but you still have to report the code. Now, if you have a PPO or your cash pay, there's nobody asks for anything. You just write the prescription, and that's the last thing I hear about it.
Interesting. So, I guess first of all, can you tell us a little about the subjective experience that people feel while they're on Adderall? And I guess it might be two different answers. It might be for the person who's the legitimate ADHD sufferer versus somebody who's using it off-label, because those might be two different experiences.
Very well said, actually. That is exactly the right way to think about it. In the case of somebody with true clinical ADHD who takes Adderall, the effects can be, frankly, life-changing in a day or two.
Wow.
The person's level of anxiety, which probably has been misdiagnosed before, and they're put on, some kind of benzo sedative or something along those lines, all of a sudden actually has relief of their anxiety because they can hold a conversation and they can look down and see that their keys are right in front of them. And, it's actually kind of gratifying to see that in somebody who really has it. For everybody else, it's, what is Adderall? Adderall is speed. There's not a difference. It's speed.
Really?
It's
That's
four different, it's a racemic mixture of 4 different amphetamines. And Adderall in particular is a specific proportion of left-hand turn and right-hand turn amphetamine molecules, but it's speed.
Wow.
I'm sure your audience is aware of the chemical nuances between something like dexedrine and the salts that are in Adderall, but it's speed.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. No, I didn't know it was quite as cut and dried as that.
I'm simplifying it a little bit, but not really.
No, that's a fair answer.
And the psychological experience of Adderall, even versus Ritalin or Vyvanse or modafinil or even Strattera, is really interesting. There are actually a lot of studies that show, like all stimulants and speed, it's going to increase your productivity. Your wakefulness, focus, hypervigilance, activity levels are all going to be higher. Your appetite is lower, and a lot of people take it for those reasons. But the interesting thing about Adderall is that you have higher scores of sociopathic behavior on Adderall. It has this kind of numbing effect on the emotions that's really, really concerning. And I call it Adderall autopilot. And, people kind of become emotionless robots because typically they're prescribed a dose that is too high. They like it because human beings like addictive substances. And they stay on it. And it's interesting. I see marriages fall apart. People kind of become sociopaths in a way on too high of a dose of Adderall. It's scary.
Is Adderall physiologically addictive?
Absolutely. Is speed physiologically addictive?
I don't know.
Yeah.
This is a nootropic show, not an illegal drug show, so we haven't had a speed episode yet. But
there's not necessarily that much of a difference except for what's written on a paper somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And honestly, it's something I didn't know.
I mean, that really applies to things like marijuana, too. It's, is it medicine? Is it drugs? I say, what's the difference? People are using it. And it depends on the intent of the user and the effect that it gives. Mm-hmm. Legal, illegal, prescription, not prescription. That's kind of irrelevant.
So what are some of the long-term physiological effects? You talked about the robot-like emotionlessness that can come with it. That's sort of, I guess, a psychological effect. Physiologically, what's going on when people are using Adderall?
Well, when you're using Adderall, it's really charging up the sympathetic nervous system. which, is like revving a car engine up towards the red line. If you rev up your engine over time, the engine's going to break down faster. The engine in this case being your heart, the myocytes in your heart, they're just a bunch of fibers that beat and contract. Cars usually will run for what? I don't know. I have a Toyota truck, so that runs forever. But I don't know, 100,000 miles, regular car.
Sure.
You run up the odometer faster. It's more strain on the heart. You have long-term cardiomyopathy. Basically, in English, that just means the heart gets weaker and weaker and weaker with time. You have higher blood pressure, not significantly, but it's there. More incidents of strokes. There's some beneficial long-term effects too. Some of the recent research says that Adderall can be protective for prefrontal cortex neurons, which are more the thinking, planning, strategy neurons. The other long-term data that I've seen about Adderall is really spotty and has been really not very well studied.
When people are using Adderall for off-label use, are they using a similar amount to what might be prescribed? What's sort of the recreational dose like?
What's the recreational dose of any drug?
Yeah, who knows?
But whatever people are going to do. And I mean, look, we're all lower brain primates to a certain extent. And, you find something you like, you're going to do more of it. I think pretty much anyone I've ever seen that, comes in and has been doing recreational Adderall or getting it from a friend and find that it helps them in some way, do way, way too much. Probably for what I imagine to be the majority of your audience, a good effective dose would be on the very low end. Higher doses are really just needed to correct true dopamine and norepinephrine imbalances in clinical ADHD. Mm-hmm. If somebody without that diagnosis were to try to reap some benefit from it, tiny, and it's going to work well, something on the order of 5 milligrams or less.
Yeah.
Most people come in and they're doing 60, 80, occasionally higher. And that's really dangerous. All of us will, if left to dose ourselves on any drug or medicine, will always overdose. It goes for drinking and it goes for Adderall. Mm-hmm. That's just a natural tendency. Obviously, I'm biased, I'm a physician, but from what I see, and I treat other physicians as well, you've got to have somebody else do the dosing for you. The college campus is like the arena where Adderall use is occurring. I read a study, I think it was last year, in a journal where, we can't really figure out who's doing Adderall, how much they're doing. It's because so much of it is underground, so who really knows what's going on? So this one very clever researcher went to a couple college campuses and measured the wastewater coming off the college campus for an entire academic year. And you can measure the metabolites of stimulants in the water. During the finals of the first semester, the amount of stimulant in the wastewater went up 400%.
Wow.
During the second semester of finals, the stimulant level reached, I wrote this down, 760% over what the average week was. So the explanation they gave in that paper is that people, through having friends with prescriptions or convincing doctors to overprescribe or getting it from India or wherever it comes from, they hoard it, save it, and then they do all of it during and prepare for finals.
Right.
And not coincidentally, that's when we really see all of the emergency room related consequences that come with Adderall overuse. You have a lot of people coming in with seizures, psychosis, high blood pressure crises. I've even seen a few people that have been tipped into more of a schizophrenic state.
Wow, really? And this is like college age people that should really be in the prime of their health.
Yep.
That's fascinating. How frequent would you say there is a truly overdose level reaction like that from Adderall? Like, I mean, you're in Los Angeles, so it's a big city, but I mean, how often is this happening?
Every semester.
Wow.
This goes back to my self-dosing comment, which I'm going to be a little bit of an idealist on because I know people may be actually listening. It's like, be really, really careful with this stuff. It's just so dangerous. I mean, it gives people eating disorders, thins their bones. It's, it's scary stuff, especially for doses. I'd say anything higher than 10, if you're not legitimately confirmed diagnosed ADHD, it's like, you're redlining the engine. It's liable to break down on you.
For people that are nootropics fans, is somebody who's abusing, using Adderall, whatever it is, are they getting something neurologically that they couldn't be getting from a couple strong cups of coffee or something far more benign?
Yeah, they are. Absolutely. That's why people like it. That's why it sells so well.
Yeah.
You're getting a lot more dopamine and norepinephrine in targeted parts of the brain that are related to focus, concentration, hyperactivity, metabolism. And yeah, I mean, look, who won the Super Bowl this year? The Seahawks.
Shucks, man, you're asking the wrong guy.
Yeah, they're one of their superstars is a really smart guy, very, very outspoken, and he was suspended last year for using a performance-enhancing substance for I think 4 or 6 games, and that was Adderall. It gives you an edge. The question is, what price are you willing to pay for that edge?
Wow, that's fantastic. It really is a devil's bargain.
It really is. There is some new research that says it does increase and improve function in certain parts of the brain, even in subjects that are not officially diagnosed as ADHD, which is new research and is very interesting. But those benefits are really at lower doses. As soon as you go higher than what a good dose for you would be, you enter a realm of neuroexcitotoxicity, which is, an individual neuron firing too hard and too fast that it dies.
Wow.
So, to go back to the driving analogy, which I like a lot, I tell people with ADHD, it's like, you have a brain where you need to drive stick, and everybody else is driving automatic. But when you're driving a car, you kind of want to find the sweet spot of the engine that's not too low, but it's not too high that it's redlining, but kind of right in the middle where it's running smoothly. If you need a little tweak to get to that sweet spot, okay. Once you start going closer to the red, you're going to have problems.
Yeah. Well, that is really good information. Is there anything that you'd like to circle back to? Anything that I should have known to ask about but overlooked?
I know probably a lot of people listening really like Adderall, but it's like cooking. Less is more. You just need a little pinch to get you into that sweet spot and really keep yourself out of trouble. Because once you go too far and the engine starts to break down, you're going to have problems the whole rest of the way.
Yeah.
So, I get it, smart drugs and the neurohacking. I mean, look, you just got to be careful. I mean, you're messing with your brain, and it's just less is more. Sometimes all you really truly need to get that focus is just a tiny little pinch, and that actually works better if people try it.
All right, so thank you very much to Dr. Sunderji. I guess I would categorize that as one of the more kind of like scary interviews that we've had on Smart Drug Smarts. As far as I walked away from that one, I haven't actually walked anywhere. I haven't gotten up from the chair since the interview was over. But my feeling at the end of that was more intimidated by Adderall than curious about it. There's always sort of that inner seesaw between curiosity and fear. And on this one, I feel like fear is going to win the battle for me. But of course, never say never. If I change my mind on that one and I give Adderall a try, I will certainly let you know. I have tried a nicotine patch now on numerous occasions since the nicotine episode that we had several episodes ago, and actually I should give you guys a rundown of my experiences so far with nicotine, but I'll save that for a future episode, because as I record this, it is 12:51 in the AM, and that's actually the perfect intro for the Ruthless Listener Retention Gimmick.
Smart Drug Smarts, Ruthless Listener Retention Gimmick.
So it seems like every single episode we have something about sleep, and this episode is no different, because now a study done by the University of Pennsylvania and lead researcher neuroscientist Sigrid Vizi is seeming to show that an erratic sleep schedule and lack of sleep can actually cause brain damage. It's not just that you can't catch up on your sleep and it's going to make you tired, but eventually you can shake it off with more sleep. But they have evidence from mice that actual neuronal death can take place when too little sleep is had. Here's the details. They took some mice, they basically gave them the kind of erratic sleep schedule that like a long-time truck driver or like a night shift worker would have, where they get bits of sleep when they can, but then their sleep is interrupted, they need to get up for something, but then every now and then they'll let them catch up with like a long blast of sleep, like you would maybe on a weekend or something if you had a job where you're working 5 nights a week, night shift. And it turned out that even giving them a chance to catch up on their sleep with occasional big blocks, these mice did not bounce back as well as their normally sleeping peers. They actually looked for brain damage, and they found it. They found it in an area associated with alertness and cognitive function called the locus coeruleus, where these mice lost 25% of their neurons. Here's what they think is happening. They think when the mice lost a little sleep, nerve cells react by making more of a protein, which they call serotonin type 3, which energizes and protects the neurons. But after losing sleep becomes sort of a habit, that compensatory reaction just kind of shuts down. It stops working, and that is when the death of these neurons would begin. So they're doing more studies. This is a mouse study. It's not a human study, but one more piece of evidence that sleep is something it's probably good to get too much rather than too little of. If you're not sure what the optimal amount is, don't go on the skimpy side. You heard it. That is the episode. If you liked what you heard here, please recommend this podcast to your friends and or leave us a review on iTunes. The show notes for this episode, as usual, will be online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com, including the links to everything that we talked about here. I will be back at you next week at the same time, the same podcast, and with the same unflagging commitment to helping you fine-tune the performance of your own brain. Have a great week and stay smart.
You've been listening to the Smart Drug Smart podcast. Visit us online at www.smartdrugsmarts.com and subscribe to our mailing list to keep your neurons buzzing with the latest in brain optimization. Smart Drug Smart should be listened to for entertainment purposes only, although some guests on the show are medical doctors, most are not, and the host is just some random guy. Nothing you hear on this podcast or read at smartdrugsmarts.com should be considered medical advice. Consult your doctor and use some damn common sense before doing anything you think might have a lasting impact on your brain.